exploring the ancient roots of Ukraine, a journey back in time. Let's take a moment to travel back in time. We're going way beyond the castles and empires that often fill our history books. We're going even further than the first written words. Instead, we're going to focus on the very beginnings of life in Ukraine. Before any history was recorded, the land we know today was already buzzing with life. It was alive with the footsteps of early humans. Who were these first people to call Ukraine home? What was their daily life like? What challenges did they face, and what victories did they achieve? Recent discoveries made by dedicated archaeologists, like Dr. Petrova, have uncovered some amazing truths. Evidence shows that humans have lived in Ukraine for hundreds of thousands of years. Imagine that. For generations upon generations, people thrived in this beautiful land. We're talking about the time when Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens roamed the earth. These early inhabitants were not living in grand cities like we see today. Instead, they were nomadic hunter-gatherers, always on the move. They followed animal herds and relied on the natural resources around them for survival. But don't think for a moment that these early humans were just aimlessly wandering through the landscape. They were incredibly resourceful. They created sophisticated tools from stone and bone, which were essential for hunting, preparing food, and building shelters. One of their most important achievements was learning how to control fire. This skill was monumental. It provided warmth during cold nights, protection from predators lurking in the dark, and the ability to cook food, making it safer and more enjoyable to eat. As time went on, these early humans began to form the very first communities in this region. Ukraine's fertile lands, vast forests, and major rivers made it an attractive place to settle, even in those distant times. The abundance of resources allowed them to thrive. They learned to work together, sharing tasks and building bonds that would lay the foundation for future societies. With the passing of time, these early inhabitants experienced a significant change in their way of life. They gradually transitioned from being completely nomadic to adopting a more settled lifestyle based on agriculture. This change was revolutionary. People began cultivating the land, planting crops, and domesticating animals. This shift marked an essential moment in Ukraine's ancient history. With agriculture came larger communities and the development of more complex social structures. The story of Ukraine does not start with kings, battles, or grand events. Instead, it begins with these often overlooked early settlers. They are the bedrock, the foundation upon which all later civilizations in Ukraine would build. Their struggles, ingenuity, and connection to the land shaped the identity of this region long before recorded history began. These prehistoric people faced many challenges. They had to deal with the harshness of nature, from fierce storms to wild animals. Food was not always plentiful, and they had to work hard to ensure their survival. The life of a hunter-gatherer was tough, but it also taught them valuable lessons about resilience and adaptability. They learned to move with the seasons, following the patterns of the animals and the growth of plants. This connection to nature helped them understand their environment deeply. Imagine waking up in a simple shelter made from branches and leaves. The sounds of nature fill the air, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the wind, and perhaps the distant call of a wild animal. The first task of the day might involve gathering food. Early humans would pick berries, nuts, and edible plants, always careful to respect the land and take only what they needed. Hunting was another crucial part of their daily life. Early humans relied on their tools to hunt for animals like deer, boar, and other game. This required skill and teamwork. They likely worked together to surround and capture their prey, showcasing their ability to communicate and strategize. The hunt was not just about food, it was a way to bond and build community. Fire was their best friend. It was used for cooking food, which made it safer to eat, and it also kept them warm during cold nights. Gathering around a fire in the evening, they likely shared stories, passing down knowledge and traditions. This storytelling created a sense of identity and belonging, connecting generations of early humans. As they settled into their communities, these early inhabitants started to develop more structured ways of living. They created social roles within their groups, dividing tasks among individuals based on their skills and strengths. This was the beginning of more complex societies, where cooperation and collaboration were essential for survival. The fertile land of Ukraine was a gift for these early settlers. It provided rich soil for growing crops, allowing them to cultivate grains like wheat and barley. The rivers that flowed through the region offered a reliable source of water for their crops and a way to fish. As they began to farm, they could produce more food than they could eat, leading to food surpluses. This change allowed communities to grow and thrive even more. The shift to agriculture also marked a turning point in human history. As people began to settle down, they could build permanent homes, creating the foundations of villages. This change led to the development of trade as well. With surplus food, they could exchange goods with neighboring groups, fostering relationships and cultural exchanges. The early settlers of Ukraine laid the groundwork for future generations. Their lives may seem simple compared to ours today, but their innovations and connections to the land were monumental. They established the first communities, created social structures, and built relationships that would endure through the ages. The rich and complex story of Ukraine begins with these early settlers, who lived and thrived long before kings and battles entered the picture. Their struggles, ingenuity, and connection to the land are essential to understanding the deep roots of Ukrainian history. By learning about their lives, we gain a greater appreciation for the enduring human spirit that has shaped this land for thousands of years. Their story is not just about survival, it's about the beginning of a journey that continues to this day. Exploring the ancient roots of Ukraine, a journey back in time. Let's take a moment to travel back in time. We're going way beyond the castles and empires that often fill our history books. We're going even further than the first written words. Instead, we're going to focus on the very beginnings of life in Ukraine. Before any history was recorded, the land we know today was already buzzing with life. It was alive with the footsteps of early humans. Who were these first people to call Ukraine home? What was their daily life like? What challenges did they face, and what victories did they achieve? Recent discoveries made by dedicated archaeologists, like Dr. Petrova, have uncovered some amazing truths. Evidence shows that humans have lived in Ukraine for hundreds of thousands of years. Imagine that. For generations upon generations, people thrived in this beautiful land. We're talking about the time when Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens roamed the earth. These early inhabitants were not living in grand cities like we see today. Instead, they were nomadic hunter-gatherers, always on the move. They followed animal herds and relied on the natural resources around them for survival. But don't think for a moment that these early humans were just aimlessly wandering through the landscape. They were incredibly resourceful. They created sophisticated tools from stone and bone, which were essential for hunting, preparing food, and building shelters. One of their most important achievements was learning how to control fire. This skill was monumental. It provided warmth during cold nights, protection from predators lurking in the dark, and the ability to cook food, making it safer and more enjoyable to eat. As time went on, these early humans began to form the very first communities in this region. Ukraine's fertile lands, vast forests, and major rivers made it an attractive place to settle, even in those distant times. The abundance of resources allowed them to thrive. They learned to work together, sharing tasks and building bonds that would lay the foundation for future societies. With the passing of time, these early inhabitants experienced a significant change in their way of life. They gradually transitioned from being completely nomadic to adopting a more settled lifestyle based on agriculture. This change was revolutionary. People began cultivating the land, planting crops, and domesticating animals. This shift marked an essential moment in Ukraine's ancient history. With agriculture came larger communities and the development of more complex social structures. The story of Ukraine does not start with kings, battles, or grand events. Instead, it begins with these often overlooked early settlers. They are the bedrock, the foundation upon which all later civilizations in Ukraine would build. Their struggles, ingenuity, and connection to the land shaped the identity of this region long before recorded history began. These prehistoric people faced many challenges. They had to deal with the harshness of nature, from fierce storms to wild animals. Food was not always plentiful, and they had to work hard to ensure their survival. The life of a hunter-gatherer was tough, but it also taught them valuable lessons about resilience and adaptability. They learned to move with the seasons, following the patterns of the animals and the growth of plants. This connection to nature helped them understand their environment deeply. Imagine waking up in a simple shelter made from branches and leaves. The sounds of nature fill the air, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the wind, and perhaps the distant call of a wild animal. The first task of the day might involve gathering food. Early humans would pick berries, nuts, and edible plants, always careful to respect the land and take only what they needed. Hunting was another crucial part of their daily life. Early humans relied on their tools to hunt for animals like deer, boar, and other game. This required skill and teamwork. They likely worked together to surround and capture their prey, showcasing their ability to communicate and strategize. The hunt was not just about food, it was a way to bond and build community. Fire was their best friend. It was used for cooking food, which made it safer to eat, and it also kept them warm during cold nights. Gathering around a fire in the evening, they likely shared stories, passing down knowledge and traditions. This storytelling created a sense of identity and belonging, connecting generations of early humans. As they settled into their communities, these early inhabitants started to develop more structured ways of living. They created social roles within their groups, dividing tasks among individuals based on their skills and strengths. This was the beginning of more complex societies, where cooperation and collaboration were essential for survival. The fertile land of Ukraine was a gift for these early settlers. It provided rich soil for growing crops, allowing them to cultivate grains like wheat and barley. The rivers that flowed through the region offered a reliable source of water for their crops and a way to fish. As they began to farm, they could produce more food than they could eat, leading to food surpluses. This change allowed communities to grow and thrive even more. The shift to agriculture also marked a turning point in human history. As people began to settle down, they could build permanent homes, creating the foundations of villages. This change led to the development of trade as well. With surplus food, they could exchange goods with neighboring groups, fostering relationships and cultural exchanges. The early settlers of Ukraine laid the groundwork for future generations. Their lives may seem simple compared to ours today, but their innovations and connections to the land were monumental. They established the first communities, created social structures, and built relationships that would endure through the ages. The rich and complex story of Ukraine begins with these early settlers, who lived and thrived long before kings and battles entered the picture. Their struggles, ingenuity, and connection to the land are essential to understanding the deep roots of Ukrainian history. By learning about their lives, we gain a greater appreciation for the enduring human spirit that has shaped this land for thousands of years. Their story is not just about survival, it's about the beginning of a journey that continues to this day.
When we think about ancient history, our minds often picture strong kings, fierce battles, and mighty empires. But what if there's another side to the story? A side filled with remarkable women who shaped the history of ancient Ukraine? It's time to dig deeper and uncover the inspiring tales of these powerful women who played essential roles in their communities. Let's embark on this journey together. The silent voices of the past. Many times, history seems to be a story told only by men. We hear about their victories, their thrones, and their grand buildings. But what about the women? Were they just standing on the sidelines? Absolutely not. Women in ancient Ukraine were not only important, but also took on significant roles that influenced their societies. For many years, the stories of these women have been overlooked or forgotten. But today, we will shine a light on their achievements, reclaim their voices, and recognize their contributions to history. Women in ancient Ukraine were not mere background characters. They were leaders, healers, and nurturers who made their mark in many ways. Meet the experts. To guide us on this journey, we have Dr. Alina Shevchenko, an expert in ancient Ukrainian history. Dr. Shevchenko studies the lives of women from the past and has spent years exploring archaeological sites to find clues about their lives. She believes that understanding these women is crucial to getting a fuller picture of history. Archaeology is like a treasure hunt. When people dig into the earth, they find ancient artifacts that tell stories of how people lived. From pottery and jewelry to tools and burial items, these discoveries reveal the important roles women played in their communities. Although old books can be hard to find and often leave women out of the narrative, the ground itself has secrets waiting to be unearthed. The importance of women in ancient societies. In ancient times, women were the backbone of their societies. They did much more than take care of their families. Many were skilled healers who used plants and herbs to treat illnesses. Some served as priests, connecting their communities with the divine. Others owned land, managed households, and ensured their communities thrived. One fascinating aspect of women's lives in ancient Ukraine was their role in agriculture. Think about it. Who spent the most time nurturing the land and working with the crops? The women. They were the ones planting seeds, tending to the fields, and gathering food. This hard work ensured that families had enough to eat, and it took great skill and knowledge. The first farmers and nurturers. Let's take a closer look at these early agricultural societies. Women were often the first farmers. They learned how to grow crops, gather food, and prepare meals. While doing all of this, they also cared for their families, teaching their children important skills and values. This nurturing role was vital for the survival of their communities. Imagine a woman in ancient Ukraine tending to her garden, planting seeds in the rich soil. She knows the best times to plant and harvest, ensuring her family has enough food. As her children play nearby, she teaches them about the plants, where to find herbs for healing, and the importance of taking care of the land. These women were not only providers, but also educators, passing down knowledge from generation to generation. Legends and realities. In addition to the everyday lives of women, we also find powerful figures in legends and historical records. Some women were known for their bravery and leadership. For example, tales of warrior queens who led their people in battle can be found in various myths and stories. These legendary women symbolize strength and courage, showing that women in ancient Ukraine were not afraid to take charge. Even if we don't have extensive written records from the past, the stories that have survived highlight the importance of women. Whether through myth or archaeology, we can see that women played significant roles in shaping their societies. The Scythians, fierce warriors and artists. As we journey through time, we discover the Scythians, a group of nomadic warriors known for their incredible skills in battle. They lived in what is now Ukraine and left behind stunning gold artifacts that showcase their artistry. These beautiful pieces give us a glimpse into their lives and the importance of women in their society. In Scythian culture, women were often warriors too. Archaeological finds show that some women were buried with weapons, indicating their status as fighters. They were not just passive figures, but active participants in their society. Imagine fierce women riding horses, leading their tribes into battle, and making their mark on history. The rise of Kievan Rus. As time went on, the region saw the rise of Kievan Rus, a powerful state that became a vibrant center of culture and politics. This period was marked by advancements in art, law, and trade. Picture the bustling streets of ancient Kiev, where merchants exchanged goods and ideas. The grand baptism of Rus marked a significant moment, shaping the religious landscape of the region. While men like Prince Volodymyr the Great and Yaroslav the Wise are often celebrated as leaders of Kievan Rus, we must not forget the women who played crucial roles during this time. Women were involved in politics, social activities, and even trade. They were influential figures in their communities and often acted as advisors to the rulers. A tapestry of cultures. Kievan Rus was a melting pot of cultures and influences. Its legacy is complex and often misrepresented in modern narratives. While some view Kievan Rus as a singular origin point for Ukrainian statehood, it's essential to recognize the diverse contributions of various groups, including women. The stories of powerful women from this era remind us that history is not just about kings and battles. It's also about the women who contributed to the culture, economy, and society in profound ways. Their stories deserve to be told alongside those of their male counterparts. Changing our perspective, it's time to change how we view history. Women were not just standing in the background. They were integral to the story of ancient Ukraine. Their contributions to agriculture, politics, and culture were significant and should be acknowledged. As we learn more about these powerful women, we can appreciate the rich tapestry of history that includes their voices. By recognizing their achievements, we honor their legacy and ensure that future generations learn about the essential roles women played in shaping their communities. Unearthing the stories of powerful women in ancient Ukraine helps us see history from a different perspective. It allows us to understand that women were not just passive figures, but active participants in their societies. They were leaders. Today, we celebrate the powerful women of ancient Ukraine, acknowledging their strength, resilience, and the incredible impact they had on their world. Let's continue to dig, discover, and share these vital stories, ensuring that the history of women is remembered and cherished for generations to come. Ukraine is a country rich in history and culture, and its art and architecture are truly amazing. They tell stories about the people, traditions, and beliefs that make Ukraine unique. In this article, we will explore some of the coolest art forms and architectural wonders in Ukraine. From beautiful embroidery to charming wooden churches, we will take a journey through the country's artistic heritage. Ukrainian embroidery, a visual delight. One of the most beautiful and important art forms in Ukraine is traditional embroidery. This is not just sewing. It is a way of telling stories. Ukrainian embroidery involves creating stunning pictures on cloth using tiny stitches. The designs are often colorful and detailed, making them a delight to see. Different regions of Ukraine have their own unique embroidery styles. For example, the patterns and colors used in the west of Ukraine might be very different from those in the east. Each design has its own special meaning. As Dr. Kovalenko, an expert in Ukrainian culture, says, look closely at the embroidery. Each area had its own patterns and colors. They weren't just decorations. They held special meanings. Embroidery plays an important role in daily life in Ukraine. People wear embroidered clothing, and the art is often used in ceremonies and celebrations. It is common to see embroidered shirts, dresses, and even tablecloths. These pieces are not just beautiful. They connect people to their heritage and the traditions of their ancestors. Painted pisanka, colorful Easter eggs. Another fascinating Ukrainian art form is pisanka, which is the art of decorating Easter eggs. Pisanki, the plural of pisanka, are beautifully crafted eggs that are covered with intricate designs. The patterns are often geometric or floral, and each one tells a story or conveys a wish. For many families in Ukraine, making paisanki is a special tradition that is passed down from generation to generation. Parents teach their children how to create these colorful eggs, and it becomes a fun activity during the Easter season. The symbols and colors used in paisanka have specific meanings. For example, a design featuring a flower might represent beauty, while a sun motif symbolizes warmth and happiness. Paisanki is not just about decorating eggs. It is a way for people to connect with their history and culture. The art form has survived through the years, and today many artists continue to practice this beautiful craft. The skill of making paisanki allows Ukrainians to honor their past while sharing their creativity with the world. Gorgeous wooden churches, a testament to architectural brilliance. As you travel through the countryside of Ukraine, you will encounter stunning wooden churches that stand tall and proud. These churches are unique architectural gems that showcase the brilliance of Ukrainian craftsmanship. Many of them were built in the 17th century and still stand today, attracting visitors from all over. The design of these wooden churches is remarkable. They often have rounded tops and are built using traditional techniques passed down through generations. The builders used locally sourced wood and crafted the structures without the use of nails, relying instead on ingenious joints and connections. This showcases not only their skill, but also their deep understanding of the materials they were working with. Each wooden church has its own character and charm. Many feature beautiful carvings, colorful paintings, and intricate decorations that reflect the beliefs and traditions of the community. Visiting these churches is like stepping back in time, allowing you to appreciate the artistry and dedication of the builders who created these sacred spaces. Vintage pottery, storytelling through design. Pottery is another significant part of Ukraine's artistic heritage. Ukrainian pottery is known for its unique designs and vibrant colors. The vintage pottery pieces often tell stories about the nation's history, mythology, and folklore. Each piece is crafted with care, and the designs can represent everything from everyday life to significant cultural events. The process of making pottery is an art form in itself. Artisans shape the clay by hand and then decorate it with beautiful patterns before firing it in a kiln. This ancient craft has been practiced for centuries, and the resulting pieces are not just functional, they are also works of art. Many pottery pieces feature symbols that hold special meanings. For example, a design of a tree may represent life and growth, while a sun could symbolize joy and warmth. These beautifully crafted items are not merely decorative. They serve as storytellers, passing down the rich cultural heritage of Ukraine. Ukrainian art and architecture, a continuing legacy. Today, Ukrainian artists and craftsmen continue to keep these traditions alive. They work hard to ensure that the rich artistic legacy of their country is not lost. Whether it is through intricate embroidery, vibrant paisanki, stunning wooden churches, or beautiful pottery, Ukrainian art and architecture are a celebration of the nation's identity and creativity. As you explore Ukraine, you will find many artists dedicated to preserving these age-old crafts. They are not only keeping traditions alive, but also innovating and adapting them for the modern world. Many contemporary artists draw inspiration from traditional motifs and techniques, creating new works that honor the past while appealing to today's audiences. For instance, some modern designers incorporate traditional embroidery patterns into clothing and home decor, giving them a fresh twist. This fusion of old and new is a beautiful way to showcase Ukrainian heritage and ensure that it remains relevant in the contemporary world. A fascinating glimpse at Ukraine's heritage. The art and architecture of Ukraine offer a fascinating glimpse into the country's remarkable heritage. From the vibrant threads of embroidered fabric to the delicate designs of paisanki, and from the charming wooden churches to the intricate pottery, each art form tells a story about the people and their traditions. When you appreciate these artistic expressions, you are not just admiring beautiful objects, you are paying tribute to the incredible legacy of Ukrainian artisans. Their skills, creativity, and dedication have allowed the rich culture of Ukraine to thrive, and their works continue to inspire and captivate people around the world. If you ever find yourself in Ukraine, take the time to explore the art and architecture that the country has to offer. Visit local markets where you can find embroidered items, paisanki, and handmade pottery. The cool Ukrainian art and architectural wonders we've explored are not just items of beauty. They are part of a living history. By embracing and celebrating these traditions, we connect with the heart of Ukraine and its people. Whether you are visiting the country or experiencing its culture from afar, take the time to appreciate the artistry and stories behind these remarkable creations. They are a testament to the resilience and creativity of the Ukrainian spirit, shining brightly through the ages. A day in the life, stepping back in time. Have you ever wondered what life was like long ago? Let's imagine waking up in ancient Ukraine. Picture a day with no phones, no cars, and no shopping malls. Life was very different then. To understand how people lived, we can look at reenactments that show us their daily routines. Morning light. Imagine waking up in a small wooden house as the sun begins to rise. The first rays of sunlight peek through the cracks in the walls, warming the room. A woman stirs awake and gets out of bed. Her first job of the day, making a fire outside. Fire was very important for cooking and keeping warm. She steps outside, where the morning air is cool and fresh. She gathers some dry sticks and starts a small fire in a fire pit. This fire will be used for cooking breakfast and for warmth throughout the day. As the flames flicker and dance, she feels a sense of accomplishment. Not everyone farms. Some people are skilled crafters. Imagine someone sitting at a simple loom, weaving fabric. This fabric will be used to make clothes for the family. Another person might be shaping clay into pots. These pots are crucial for cooking and storing food. Visualize the busy scene. A potter molds the wet clay with their hands, crafting it into a beautiful shape. The loom is a series of strings. It's the start of a new day, and she is ready for what lies ahead. Off to the fields. While the woman is busy making a fire, the men in the family prepare to head to the fields. They grab their simple farming tools, made from wood and metal. The sun is now shining brightly, and the men know it is time to plow the land and plant seeds. Farming is hard work. It takes a lot of effort to grow food that will feed the family. The men walk to the fields, feeling the warm earth beneath their feet. They start plowing the soil, making rows where they will plant seeds. It's backbreaking work, but they know that the food they grow will be vital for their survival. Women's work. Back at home, the women are busy with their tasks. They gather around a large stone bowl to grind grain. Using heavy stones, they crush the grains to make flour for bread. Making bread is an important part of their daily lives. The children help out too. They might be assigned smaller tasks, like fetching water or helping to keep an eye on younger siblings. Family bonds are strong, and everyone has a role to play in this simple but hard-working life. Crafting and creating. Not everyone spends their day farming. Some people in the community are skilled at crafting. Imagine someone sitting at a basic loom, weaving fabric to make clothes. Others are busy shaping clay into pots for cooking or storing food. These crafts are essential for everyday life. Without these items, cooking and clothing would be much more difficult. The sound of weaving and the soft squelch of clay being shaped fill the air. The people in the community work together, sharing their skills and helping each other. They know that by supporting one another, they can create a stronger community. Mealtime. After a long day of hard work, everyone gathers for a simple meal. The family sits together on a wooden bench, sharing the food they have prepared. Their meal might include bread, some soup made from vegetables, and whatever they were able to grow that season. As they eat, they talk about their day. Sharing stories and laughter around the table is an important part of their family life. This meal is not just about food. It's about connecting with one another and strengthening their bonds. A look into their lives. Experts who study ancient Ukraine tell us about the clothing people wore and the food they ate. People wore clothes made from natural materials like linen, which they made from flax plants. Their diet was based on what they could grow or find in their environment, such as grains, vegetables, and fruits, they also believed in different gods and followed strong traditions. Family and community played a central role in their lives. They lived together, helped each other with farming, and built their homes side by side. Facing challenges, life in ancient Ukraine was not easy. Farming was hard work, and families relied heavily on the weather and the land. If there was too much rain or not enough, it could affect their crops and food supply. But despite these challenges, the people were resilient. They learned to adapt to their environment and support each other through difficult times. Every day presented new challenges, but there was also joy in their lives. The strength of the community helped them overcome hardships. Neighbors would lend a hand during busy harvest times or when building a new home. Evening gatherings. As the sun sets, the day is not yet over. In the evening, families and friends might gather around a bonfire. This is a time for relaxation and fun. People share stories, sing songs, and even dance. The warmth of the fire brings them together, creating a sense of joy and connection. Imagine the laughter and the sound of music filling the air. Children run around, playing games, while the adults share tales of their ancestors and the adventures they have had. These moments of joy are what make life special. A glimpse into the past. Reenactments like these give us a glimpse into what life was like in ancient Ukraine. They help us see the struggles people faced, but they also show us the simple joys of life. People were deeply connected to the land and to each other. Understanding this history and culture helps us understand where we come from. It reminds us of the fundamental parts of being human: community, family, and resilience. Even though life was very different, the values they held remain important today. Lessons from the past. Stepping back in time allows us to appreciate the simple things in life. In our modern world, filled with technology and convenience, we can sometimes forget the importance of community and hard work. Life in ancient Ukraine teaches us about the value of patience, perseverance, and connection. It shows us that even when life is challenging, there can be joy and fulfillment in our relationships with others. Reflecting on our roots. As we reflect on this journey to the past, let's remember the lessons learned. Life may have changed dramatically, but the essence of being human remains the same. We can take inspiration from the people of ancient Ukraine, embracing their spirit of community and their appreciation for the simple joys in life. By understanding their struggles and triumphs, we can foster deeper connections with our own families and communities today. Conclusion. So, what was it like to live in ancient Ukraine? It was a life of hard work, strong family ties, and deep connections to the land. Through the reenactments, we are reminded of the beauty of simple living and the strength of community. Next time you sit down for a meal with your loved ones or gather around a fire, think of the ancient families who shared the same moments of joy and connection. They remind us that no matter how much life changes, some things will always remain the same. The heart of life is found in the relationships we build and the love we share. Absolutely. Let's break down this crucial conflict in a way that's easy to understand and keeps you hooked. Myth versus reality. The current conflict and the battle for history. Imagine the world is watching a big, important play. On one side of the stage, there's Russia, a very big and powerful country. On the other side, there's Ukraine, a country that's been around for a while, but is maybe not as big or strong. Right now, these two countries are in a really serious fight. You see it on the news, you hear people talking about it. It's a conflict that's making a lot of people sad and worried. But there's something else happening besides the bombs and the soldiers. There's a fight about what's true and what's not true about Ukraine. It's like a battle over the story of Ukraine, its history, and even if it should be its own country at all. For a long time, some people, especially in Russia, have been telling a story about Ukraine that isn't quite right. They've been saying that Ukraine isn't really its own thing, that it's just a part of Russia. It's like saying your arm isn't really attached to your body. It's just a separate little thing. This made-up story, this myth, is being used to say that Russia is right to be fighting in Ukraine. They're saying they're just taking back what was always theirs. But the truth, the real story, is much more interesting and much more important. Think about these two pictures in your head. Picture number one, a really, really old map. On this map, you see a huge blob that says Russia. Sometimes, the borders of this blob are drawn in a way that makes it look like the land where Ukraine is now is just part of Russia. It's like someone colored in your house with the same crayon they use for the neighbor's house. Picture number two, a map you'd see today. This map clearly shows Ukraine as its own country with its own lines around it. It's separate from Russia, just like your house is separate from your neighbor's. This difference between the two maps is the key to understanding what's going on. Russia is trying to use that old map, that old idea, to say Ukraine doesn't have the right to be its own place on the modern map. The world is paying close attention to what is happening between Russia and Ukraine. Each day, we hear news stories about the conflict, but there is something much deeper going on. Beyond the headlines, there is a serious fight over history itself. This battle is about how people view Ukraine, its past, and its right to exist as an independent country. For a long time, some people have tried to create a false story about Ukraine. This story claims that Ukraine is not a real country and that its history is just a part of Russia's history. This idea is not true, but it is being used to justify Russia's actions and aggression toward Ukraine. The truth about Ukraine is much more complex and goes back many centuries. To understand the current conflict, we need to look back at history. Ukraine has its own rich and unique history that is separate from Russia. While there are connections between the two countries, this does not mean that Ukraine is merely an extension of Russia. Ukraine has been inhabited for thousands of years. The area has seen many different cultures, peoples, and influences. Over time, Ukraine developed its own identity, language, and traditions. It became known as a land of farmers, traders, and artists. In the 20th century, Ukraine experienced tremendous hardship, including famine and political repression, especially during the Soviet era. In 1991, after the Soviet Union fell apart, Ukraine declared independence. This was a significant moment for the country and its people. For the first time, Ukrainians had the chance to build their own nation, free from outside control. The new country was recognized by the world, and Ukraine began to forge its own path. Despite Ukraine's long history and its independence, some people still try to deny its existence as a separate nation. They argue that Ukraine is just a part of Russia, and this belief has been pushed by various political leaders and state media. This myth is dangerous because it not only disrespects Ukraine's identity, but also justifies aggression against it. When we look at maps from the past, we often see the old Russian Empire, which included parts of Ukraine. Some people use these historical maps to claim that Ukrainian land has always been Russian. However, using history to deny a nation's current reality is misleading and harmful. Let's dive deeper, unpacking the myth. So, what exactly is this made-up story? It's like a fairy tale, but a dangerous one. The main part of the myth is this: Ukraine isn't a real country. It's just a younger brother of Russia, and its history is just part of Russia's bigger story. Imagine you have a sibling. You both have the same parents, but you're still your own person, right? You have your own friends, your own favorite things, your own dreams. The myth about Ukraine tries to say that Ukraine is like a sibling that doesn't get to have its own identity. People who believe this myth often say things like, "The Ukrainian language is just a funny way of speaking Russian." This isn't true. Ukrainian is a distinct language with its own long history. Ukrainian culture is just Russian culture, but a little different. Again, not true. Ukraine has its own unique traditions, music, art, and ways of life. Ukraine has always been part of Russia. This is a big one, and it's wrong. Ukraine has had many periods of independence and has fought for its own identity for centuries. It's like someone trying to tell you that your favorite food isn't really special. It's just a copy of someone else's food. It doesn't feel good, and it's not accurate. The reality check: Ukraine's rich and unique history. Now, let's look at the real story of Ukraine. It's a story filled with brave people, important events, and a strong desire to be their own boss. Think way back in time, even before Russia was a big empire. On the land that is now Ukraine, there were people living there, building their own towns and forming their own groups. One of the important groups was called the Kievan Rus. This was a big and powerful state, and Kiev, the capital of modern Ukraine, was its heart. Imagine a kingdom with its own rules, its own princes, and its own way of doing things. That was the Kievan Rus. Both Ukraine and Russia trace some of their history back to this time, but it doesn't mean they're the same thing. It's like two rivers that start from the same mountain spring. They flow in different directions and become different rivers. Over many centuries, Ukraine went through a lot. Different empires and powers tried to control it. There were times when parts of Ukraine were under the rule of Poland, Lithuania, and yes, Russia too. But even during these times, the idea of Ukraine being its own place, with its own people and culture, never disappeared. Think about a flower that gets stepped on. It might get bent, but if the roots are strong, it will try to grow back up. That's how Ukraine was. Even when things were tough, the spirit of Ukraine stayed alive. Moments of freedom. Ukraine's fight for independence. Throughout history, there were times when Ukrainians fought hard to be free. Imagine groups of brave warriors, like the Cossacks, who rode on horseback and defended their lands. They were like the superheroes of their time, fighting for their freedom. In the early 20th century, after a big war shook the world, Ukraine even declared its independence. It was like a bird finally spreading its wings and flying. But this freedom didn't last long. Powerful neighbors, including a newly formed Soviet Union, which Russia was the biggest part of, didn't want Ukraine to be independent. Think of it like someone building a beautiful sandcastle, and then a big wave comes and washes it away. That's what happened to Ukraine's early attempts at independence. For most of the 20th century, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. Life was tough, and the Soviet government tried to make everyone think and act the same. They tried to downplay Ukraine's unique culture and history, pushing that myth that it was just part of Russia. But even then, Ukrainians held on to their identity. They spoke their language at home, they sang their own songs, and they remembered their own history. It's like having a secret treasure that no one can take away from you. The big break. Ukraine becomes independent again. Then in 1991, something amazing happened. The Soviet Union fell apart, like a giant building crumbling. And out of the pieces, Ukraine emerged as an independent country once again. Imagine the joy and excitement. People celebrated in the streets, finally free to decide their own future. They created their own government, their own laws, and their own flag. A beautiful blue and yellow banner that represents the wide blue skies over fields of golden wheat. For over 30 years, Ukraine has been building its own way of life as an independent nation. They've faced challenges, but they've also made progress. They've developed their own economy, their own relationships with other countries, and their own unique identity in the world. Think of a child growing up and becoming an adult. They might still have a connection to their parents, but they have their own life, their own goals, and their own responsibilities. That's what Ukraine is like as an independent nation. Why does the myth matter now? So, why is this old myth about Ukraine not being a real country being brought up again now? It's because it's being used to justify the current conflict. Think of it like this. If someone believes that Ukraine is just part of Russia, then they might think it's okay for Russia to try and take it back. It's like saying you're just tidying up your own house, even if you're actually going into someone else's room. This false narrative makes it easier for some people to support the aggression against Ukraine. It tries to paint Ukraine as not really existing, so attacking it seems less like attacking another country and more like just dealing with an internal problem. But here's the crucial point. Believing the myth ignores the real people of Ukraine, their history, their culture, and their right to choose their own future. It's like pretending that someone's feelings don't matter, just because you don't want them to. The battle for history, fighting for the truth. That's why the current conflict isn't just about land or power. It's also a battle for history. It's a fight over what story gets told about Ukraine. On one side, there's the myth, the false story that denies Ukraine's existence. On the other side, there's the reality, the true story of Ukraine's long and unique journey. It's like two teams playing a game, and one team is trying to cheat by changing the rules. The battle for history is about making sure the real rules, the real facts, are known and respected. We see this battle playing out in different ways. In the news, reporters are working hard to tell the truth about what's happening in Ukraine, countering the false narratives being spread. Online, people are sharing historical facts and information to debunk the myths. In schools and universities, historians and educators are teaching the real history of Ukraine. Through art, music, and culture, Ukrainians are expressing their identity and sharing their stories with the world. It's like shining a light on the truth to make the shadows of the myths disappear. Seeing the maps clearly, understanding the difference. Let's go back to those maps. Imagine you're trying to find your way to a friend's house. If you use an old, outdated map, you might get lost. But if you use a current, accurate map, you'll find your way easily. The old maps that show Ukraine as just part of Russia are like those outdated maps. They don't reflect the reality of the world today. The modern maps, the ones that clearly show Ukraine's borders, are the accurate ones. Understanding the difference between these maps is crucial. It helps us see that the current conflict is based on a flawed and outdated understanding of history. It's like looking at a picture puzzle. If you try to force the wrong piece into place, it won't fit. Trying to force Ukraine back into a Russian narrative is like trying to force the wrong puzzle piece. It just doesn't work. The human cost of the myth. It's important to remember that this battle over history isn't just an abstract idea. It has real consequences for real people. When people believe the myth dehumanizes Ukrainians, making them seem less like real people with their own lives and dreams. This makes the violence and destruction even more tragic and unacceptable. Looking ahead, remembering the truth. As the world watches the conflict unfold, it's vital to remember the truth about Ukraine. It's important to resist the false narratives and to stand in solidarity with the Ukrainian people. Think of it like being a witness in a trial. It's your responsibility to tell the truth, even if it's difficult or uncomfortable. In this battle for history, we all have a role to play in remembering and sharing the truth about Ukraine. By understanding the real history of Ukraine, we can better understand the current conflict and work towards a future where peace and justice prevail. We can help ensure that the voices and the identity of the Ukrainian people are respected and recognized. It's like planting a seed of truth. If we nurture it and protect it, it will grow into something strong and beautiful. The truth about Ukraine's history is a seed worth planting and protecting. The fight between Russia and Ukraine isn't just about what's happening now. It's also about the story of Ukraine's past. Some people are trying to say Ukraine isn't a real country, but that's not true. Ukraine has its own long history, its own culture, and its own right to exist. Thinking of Ukraine as just part of Russia is like looking at an old, wrong map. The real map shows Ukraine as its own place. It's important to remember the truth and to stand with Ukraine. The battle for history is about making sure the right story gets told. Just like you know you are your own person, Ukraine knows it is its own country. And that's a truth worth fighting for. The story we can't let them erase. Why Ukraine's history matters now more than ever. Imagine someone trying to tell you that your family history isn't real. They say your grandparents weren't who they were, that the stories they told you were made up, and that your whole idea of where you come from is wrong. That would feel pretty awful, right? It would be like they're trying to steal a part of you. That's kind of what's happening with Ukraine right now. Some people are trying to rewrite Ukraine's story, to make it seem like Ukraine isn't really its own thing. They want to make it look like Ukraine is just a little part of a bigger story that belongs to someone else. To understand why this is so important, we talked to a smart person who knows a lot about the history between Ukraine and another big country nearby, Russia. This smart person is called Dr. Tarasenko, and he's a historian, which means he studies the past. Dr. Tarasenko explained something really important to us. He said, this story they're telling is on purpose ignoring hundreds of years of how Ukraine grew up. They're trying to make it seem like Ukraine doesn't have its own special culture and that it didn't really want to be its own country. It's like they want to say Ukraine shouldn't even exist as a separate nation. They want to get rid of what makes Ukraine, Ukraine. Think of it like this. Imagine you have a beautiful, colorful painting. Someone comes along and tries to paint over it with just one color, saying the original colors never mattered. That's what's happening with Ukraine's history. Someone is trying to paint over its unique colors with a single color that doesn't really fit. This isn't just about looking at old maps and reading dusty books, Dr. Tarasenko told us. It's about something much bigger. It's about who a whole group of people, the Ukrainians, believe they are. It's about what makes them feel like they belong together. And it's even being used to say that it's okay to have a really tough fight, a war, going on right now. The people who are trying to rewrite Ukraine's history often talk about how Ukrainians and Russians have shared the same past and are connected. And it's true, there have been times when their stories were mixed together. But Dr. Tarasenko says they conveniently forget all the times when Ukraine was independent, when Ukrainians were building their own culture and language, and all the fights they had to not be controlled by Russia. It's like saying that because you once share a classroom with someone, you're exactly the same person and have no differences. Think of them like the cowboys of the American West, but with their own unique style and traditions. They had their own way of governing themselves, and they were a symbol of Ukrainian freedom and courage. The stories of the Cossacks are important to Ukrainians because they show that the desire for independence has been in their hearts for a very long time. These weren't just random fighters. They were building a society that was different and wanted to stay that way. But when some people talk about the history of the area, they might make it seem like the Cossacks were just part of a bigger Russian story. That's like saying the cowboys were just part of British history because some of the first settlers came from Britain. It doesn't tell the whole story of who the Cossacks really were and what they stood for in Ukrainian history. Kiev, a very old city with a Ukrainian heart. Think of a city that's been around for a really, really long time, even longer than many famous cities in Russia. That's Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. It's a beautiful city with old churches and buildings that tell stories of centuries past. Kiev was a very important center a long time ago. Even before Moscow, the capital of Russia, became important. It was a place where culture and ideas grew, and it was a key part of the development of Ukrainian identity. People in Kiev had their own ways of doing things, their own language evolving, and their own sense of community. Imagine a tree with strong roots. Kiev is like one of the main roots of Ukrainian culture. It shows that Ukraine has a long and proud history that goes back a very long time, independent of its neighbors. But sometimes, when people talk about the history of this region, they might focus more on Moscow and make it seem like Kiev was just a smaller, less important place. That's like saying the roots of the tree don't matter as much as the branches. It ignores the deep history and the unique role that Kiev played in shaping Ukraine. Dr. Tarasenko would say that these examples, like the Cossacks and the history of Kiev, are not just little notes in the story of Russia. They are big, important parts of the special story of Ukraine. The current fighting that's happening is partly about Ukraine wanting to take back its own story and protect it from being changed by others. The truth, according to the evidence from history, is that Ukraine has had its own long and interesting journey, different from Russia's. It has its own special things like its culture, its language, its heroes, and even its sad memories of fighting for its freedom. From old kingdoms to times when they governed themselves, Ukraine's path has been its own, even when it was connected to Russia. Think about it like having two different families who lived next door to each other for a long time. They might share some things like a fence or a friendly chat now and then, but they still have their own houses, their own traditions, and their own family stories. Ukraine and Russia are like that. They've been neighbors, but they have their own distinct histories. Right now, you can see how important this history is in the things Ukrainians are doing to resist the conflict. They are using old Ukrainian symbols, like special patterns and designs, in their art and even on their military vehicles. They are singing their own folk songs and speaking their own language loudly and proudly. It's like they're saying, "This is who we are, and we won't let you forget it." These symbols and traditions aren't just old things from the past. They are alive and powerful, showing everyone that Ukraine has its own identity that it doesn't want to lose. This fight isn't just happening on the ground. it's also a fight over whose story gets told and remembered. Dr. Tarasenko would explain that the conflict today isn't just about who controls what land. It's about something deeper. It's about who gets to say who the Ukrainian people are and what their future will be. It's about whether Ukraine has the right to have its own past, its own present, and its own future, separate from anyone else telling them what it should be. Understanding the real history of Ukraine is like having a strong shield against wrong information. When you know the true story, you can see through the made-up stories and understand that Ukraine is, without a doubt, its own independent nation. Imagine someone trying to convince you that the sky is green. If you know that the sky is blue, you won't believe them. Knowing Ukraine's real history helps people see the truth and not be fooled by false narratives. The amazing story of old Ukraine. Super strong and super smart people. Imagine a land way back in time. This land is called Ukraine, and even thousands of years ago, it was a really special place. The people who lived there were super strong like superheroes and super smart like great thinkers. Their story is like an exciting adventure book, full of times they were brave and times they made wonderful things. This old story of Ukraine shows us that the people who lived there always had a giant heart full of love for their land. They cared for it deeply, like you care for your favorite toy or your pet. They were also really good at bouncing back when things got tough. Imagine a bouncy ball. You push it down, but it always pops back up. That's how the people of ancient Ukraine were. Knowing this old story is super important. It helps us understand what's happening in Ukraine today. It's like knowing the beginning of a movie helps you understand what's happening at the end. And if we understand their history, we can help make sure that everyone knows how amazing Ukraine's past is and that it's treated with respect, like a precious treasure. Now, history can sometimes be like a puzzle with missing pieces. Sometimes, people tell stories about the past that aren't completely true, like made-up fairy tales. These made-up stories are called myths. They can be fun, but they don't always tell us what really happened. So, we need to dig a little deeper, like detectives, to find the real facts about ancient Ukraine. Guess what? A long time ago, Ukraine wasn't just one group of people. It was home to different groups, like different teams playing in the same big field. These groups had cool names like the Scythians and the Tripolians. Think of the Scythians as super cool cowboys of the past. They were amazing at riding horses. Imagine them galloping across the land, so fast and skilled. They were also really good at making beautiful things out of gold. Shiny, sparkly gold. They made jewelry and decorations that were so beautiful, you'd say, wow. Then there were the Tripolians. Imagine them as super smart builders and farmers. They built big houses and lived in communities, almost like little villages. And they were really good at growing food. They knew all about planting seeds and making sure they had enough to eat. That's super important. Now, life wasn't always easy for these early Ukrainians. Imagine big storms coming and shaking everything up. Well, they had their own kinds of storms, people trying to take over their land. Imagine someone trying to take your toys. It wouldn't be fair, right? The people of ancient Ukraine had to face these challenges again and again. Even though it was tough, the spirit of the Ukrainian people never broke. It was like a strong tree that could bend in the wind, but never snapped. They held on to their traditions, the special things they did and believed in. They passed these traditions down from parents to children, like sharing a favorite family recipe. This strength and spirit are still alive in Ukraine today. You can see it in their culture, which is like a big, colorful party with lots of fun things happening. Think of their music. Beautiful songs that make you want to dance. Think of their art. Amazing paintings and crafts that are full of life. Think of their language. Special words and ways of talking that are unique to them. And think of their customs. Special ways of celebrating and doing things that have been passed down for generations. Sometimes, people have ideas about Ukraine that aren't quite right. It's like when someone tells you a story about a monster under your bed, but it's just your imagination. One of these not quite right ideas is that Ukraine has always been split apart, like a broken toy. But if you look at the real story, you see something different. You see times when Ukrainians came together, like a team working towards the same goal, to protect their way of life. Imagine everyone in a village helping to build a strong fence to keep their homes safe. This unity, this working together, is super important for understanding what's happening in Ukraine now and what might happen in the future. Today, the people of Ukraine are working hard to keep their history alive. It's like taking care of a precious garden. They have special places called museums, like giant treasure chests filled with old things, where they show off the amazing things from Ukraine's past. They have cultural centers, like community halls, where people can learn about their traditions and celebrate them. There are also super smart people called educators and historians, like teachers and detectives of the past, who are working hard to teach everyone the real story of Ukraine. They're helping people understand where they come from, their roots, like the roots of a big tree. Knowing your history is super important. It makes you feel proud of who you are and where you come from. It's like knowing your family's story and feeling connected to everyone who came before you. It also helps other people respect your traditions, like respecting your friend's favorite game. So, the story of ancient Ukraine isn't just something that happened a long time ago and is now finished. It's a living story, like a river that keeps flowing. It's still influencing what's happening today and will guide what happens in the future. By learning the real facts and not just listening to the myths, we can truly appreciate the amazing spirit of the Ukrainian people. Their story is full of times they were strong, times they were creative, and a deep, deep love for their land. Let's all celebrate and respect this amazing history. Let's learn from it and help make sure that everyone knows how special Ukraine and its people truly are. As we move forward together, let's remember the strength and creativity of ancient Ukraine and work towards a future where its rich heritage is not just remembered, but celebrated by everyone. It's like having a big, happy party where everyone is invited to appreciate the wonderful story of Ukraine. A living story, the past and the present. So, the story of ancient Ukraine isn't just something that happened and is over. It's a living story. It's like a river that flows from the past into the present and continues into the future. The things that happened long ago have shaped the Ukraine we see today. By learning about the past, we can understand why things are the way they are now. We can see the strength and creativity that have always been a part of the Ukrainian people. Let's remember that separating the myths from the reality is like polishing a precious stone to make it shine brighter. When we know the true history, we truly honor the incredible spirit of the Ukrainian people. Their story is one of never giving up, of being clever and inventive, and of loving their land with all their hearts. Let's celebrate this amazing heritage. Let's respect it. And as we move forward, let's do it together, with an understanding of the rich and powerful story of ancient Ukraine. This story is a treasure, and it deserves to be known and cherished by everyone. The big help. How big friends are helping Ukraine stay strong. Imagine a playground. There's a kid named Ukraine. Ukraine is a really nice kid, wants to play fair, and just wants to be left alone to do their own thing. Then, there's a big, mean kid named Russia. Russia is trying to take Ukraine's toys and even push Ukraine off the playground. This isn't fair at all, and Ukraine is trying really hard to stand up for themselves. Now, imagine there are some other big kids on the playground who see what's happening. They see that Russia is being a bully. These big kids are the United States, the European Union, which is like a group of lots of kids, and a club they belong to called NATO. They want to help Ukraine, but don't want to get into a direct fight with the bully themselves. So, they're finding ways to help Ukraine stay strong and push the bully back. This is kind of like what's happening in the real world right now. Let's break it down in super simple terms. The bad guy, Russia, is a very big country, and it has a lot of soldiers and weapons. The leader of Russia, whose name is like the boss of the playground, decided that he wanted to take over Ukraine. This started way back, but it got really, really bad recently. Russia sent its soldiers into Ukraine to try and take control. This is a big problem because Ukraine is its own country, and nobody should tell them what to do. The brave kid. Ukraine is much smaller than Russia, but the people there are very brave and don't want Russia to take over. They are fighting back really hard to protect their homes, their families, and their country. They are like the smaller kid who is standing their ground against the bully. Even though it's scary and tough, the helpers arrive. The United States is like one of the biggest and strongest kids on the playground. They don't live right next to Ukraine, but they see that what Russia is doing is wrong. So, the United States is sending a lot of help to Ukraine. What kind of help? Giving Ukraine tools to fight back. Imagine giving Ukraine super cool water guns that shoot really far and can even make the bullies slip and fall. In real life, this means the United States is giving Ukraine weapons like guns, bullets, rockets, and even big things like tanks. They are also giving Ukraine things like helmets and vests to keep their soldiers safe. This is called military aid. The United States is giving Ukraine a lot of these things so they can defend themselves better. Giving Ukraine money. Fighting is expensive. Ukraine needs money to pay its soldiers, buy food, and keep things running. The United States is giving Ukraine a lot of money to help with all of this. This is called financial aid. Think of it like giving Ukraine allowance so they can buy what they need to stay in the fight, helping Ukraine in other ways. The United States is also helping Ukraine by sharing information. They have people who are good at finding out what Russia is. Planning. They share this information with Ukraine, so Ukraine can be ready. It's like telling the smaller kid when the bully is about to try something sneaky. Putting the bully in timeout. The United States is also trying to make things harder for Russia. They are doing this by putting sanctions on Russia. Think of sanctions like taking away the bully's favorite toys or not letting him trade snacks with other kids. This makes it harder for Russia to get money and things they need. The European Union, or EU, is like a group of many countries in Europe who work together. Many of these countries are right next door to Ukraine. They also see that what Russia is doing is wrong and want to help. Helping like the US, but closer. The EU is doing many of the same things as the United States. They are giving Ukraine weapons and money. Because they are closer, it's sometimes easier for them to get things to Ukraine quickly. Taking care of people who had to leave. When the fighting started, many people in Ukraine had to leave their homes to stay safe. The countries in the EU have opened their doors to these people, giving them places to stay, food, and help. It's like letting the kids who are scared come into your house and making them feel safe. This is called humanitarian aid. More time out for the bully. The EU is also putting sanctions on Russia, just like the United States. Because the EU is in Europe, right next to Russia, their sanctions can sometimes hurt Russia even more. What happens next for Ukraine? The future is uncertain. Nobody knows exactly what will happen next. It's like trying to guess what the weather will be like next month. But here are some things that could happen. Ukraine keeps fighting. Ukraine is very strong and determined. They could keep fighting and eventually push Russia out of their country. This would be like the smaller kid finally standing up to the bully and making him run away. The fighting goes on for a long time. Sometimes fights can go on for a long time, even if nobody wins completely. This could mean that Ukraine and Russia keep fighting for months or even years. A deal is made. Sometimes, people who are fighting decide to stop and make an agreement. This could happen between Ukraine and Russia. It would be like the kids on the playground finally agreeing to share the toys. Things get worse. There's also a chance that things could get even worse. Other countries could get involved, or the fighting could become even more dangerous. Volodymyr Zelensky, the superhero leader. Imagine the bravest kid on the playground, the one who everyone looks up to. That's kind of like Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, staying strong. When the fighting started, many people thought Zelensky might run away. But he stayed in Ukraine, right in the middle of the danger. This showed everyone that he was brave and that he believed in his country. Talking to the world. Zelensky has talked to leaders of many countries around the world, asking for their help. He's like the kid who is really good at explaining why the bully is wrong and why Ukraine needs support. He's convinced many countries to help, keeping people hopeful. Even though things are very hard in Ukraine, Zelensky tries to keep people hopeful. He reminds them that they are strong and that they will win in the end. A symbol of courage. Zelensky has become a symbol of courage and resistance for people all over the world. He shows that even when things are tough, you can stand up for what you believe in. Why does this matter to everyone else? You might be thinking, why should I care about what's happening in Ukraine? It's far away. But what's happening in Ukraine is important for a few reasons. Nobody likes bullies. Most people don't like it when someone tries to push others around and take what isn't theirs. What Russia is doing is wrong, and it's important to stand up against bullies. It affects the whole world. When there's a big fight like this, it can affect everyone. For example, it can make the price of things like gas and food go up. It's about freedom. Ukraine wants to be free to make its own choices. If Russia takes over Ukraine, it means that one big country can just decide to take over another smaller one. This is a threat to freedom everywhere. It shows what can happen. What's happening in Ukraine shows us that bad things can happen in the world, and it's important to try to stop them. The future is uncertain, but the bravery of the Ukrainian people and the support they are getting from their friends give hope that they can overcome this challenge and keep their country free.